Today I want to tell you about how the universe is created. And as I had said earlier, it's not just that I want to give you a science lesson. It's because the so-called theory of evolution is one of the most powerful influences from science that have taken people away from their belief in God that has ever existed. And when children are in school, they're going to be taught the theory of evolution as if it is true. And I really feel upset that evolution is taught like it is really true, because particularly the original theory of evolution, which came from Charles Darwin about 150 years ago, the mechanism by which evolution took place was called natural selection, meaning that certain characteristics would give a survival advantage, and those who had that survival advantage would be more likely to reproduce and show those characteristics, and they slowly just move in a random process. Now, it has since been shown that even if you could move from species to species through random selection, that the amount of time necessary would be perhaps thousands of times longer than the Earth has existed. And so they know that biologists and geneticists know that it was not possible for natural selection to take place in that way. And so then they changed it to a process that they called mutation. They said it was random mutation. And these mutations, the positive ones would give an advantage, and once again a random process moving toward all the characteristics. Two things. One of them is there's 90-some percent of probably 99% or some very high percent of mutations are harmful rather than positive. So you're not going to get very much positive development through mutation. And biologists have probably recognized this also. And right now, I would say biologists, although they feel extremely strongly that evolution, the process of evolution is true, if they wanted to be honest, they would probably admit that they don't know how it works. But one of the things I've noticed about people who support evolution is that they start as believers in the process. In other words, it isn't that they come to believe in the process. In other words, they're not doing their research and then come to believe. They are doing their research as believers. And it is always very dangerous to do research as a believer in what the outcome will be, because there are so many ways you can influence the outcome. So by the way, just to say what evolution is, because there are really two meanings to the word evolution. And certainly, in Islam, we have never had any problem with the first meaning of evolution. Evolution means progressive development. So before Darwin came up with his theories, the word evolution existed. And it wasn't talking about what he was talking about. It is just a word that refers to progressive development. In Islam, we have no difficulty at all with the concept of progressive development. And if you were to take generally what Allah has told us in the Quran, and certainly what many scholars have said since, it is well within the beliefs of Islam that Allah created the world, the universe, and life, and biological life through a series of stages, progressive stages from the simple to the complex. And as a matter of fact, when Darwin first came out with his theory of evolution in England about 150 years ago, there were Orientalist historians who knew quite a bit about Islam, and they said at that time, well, Darwin's idea is not so new. This is what we already knew from Islam, and they called it Mohammedan evolution. Mohammedan evolution. Because the early scholars had given a lot of thought to how Allah created the universe. The Christians seem to have a belief that God just created the universe as it is right now. But that belief, unfortunately, there are quite a few Muslims who believe that today. But there weren't Muslims who believed that in the past. And the reason quite a few Muslims believe that today is because of the influence of Christianity. So Christianity has influenced Muslims to think that if you oppose evolution, the opposite to evolution is Allah creating everything pretty much as it is right now. And a very prominent early Islamic scholar, Ibn Arabi. Has everyone heard of Ibn Arabi? And Ibn Arabi, although there's a few controversies about him on other things, but he dealt with a question that we would consider the development of life and human life today. And he said something that was, if you were to say today, I think many Muslims would be upset with you. But at the time, it didn't upset anybody when he said these things. And it gives an idea about how open the early Muslims were to considering possibilities about how Allah did things. Ibn Arabi said that Allah created the universe through, created the physical world through a series of stages, and that the development of the high point of one stage is the same as the low point on the high point on the previous stage is the same as the low point on the next stage. And then he went on amazingly to say the highest of the animals was the monkey, and the lowest of the humans was the monkey. Yeah, see, the highest, when you change from one level to one stage to another, the highest of previous stage is the same as the lowest of the next stage. And so that's how he came to the conclusion that the highest of the animals was the monkey and the lowest of the humans was the monkey. Now, nobody got real upset with him and said, oh, what a sinful thing to say, that's sacrilegious and all that. What the scholars did was, they said, we look at what he has to say and we feel that he doesn't have the evidence to justify saying that. And so that did not become an accepted belief in Islam. And he was wrong, of course. But I mean, what is important is two things. One, that even 1,000 years ago, Muslim scholars were considering issues like this. And two, to suggest something like that may have been the way that things happened was not upsetting at the time, but it is upsetting today. And one of the reasons it's upsetting today is because for Christians believe that a scientific understanding of creation will go against their religious beliefs, and it will, because their religious beliefs are fixed in that God created everything as it is right now. In Islam, our religious beliefs on creation are not fixed, because Allah didn't give us the detail, so we are open to look at His creation and try and find out how He did it. Yeah, so we're actually told to do it. So whatever we find cannot threaten our beliefs, because, you know, Allah wants us to look. So now we get to the actual beginning of the universe. And it used to be that there were really only two theories of how the universe came to be. One of them was that the universe had always been like it was. Right? What we see now had been there forever. Because people didn't see there was change going on, right? You look at mountains, they don't look like they're changing. You look at continents, they don't look like they're changing. They are all the time, but so slowly we don't see it. So people thought that maybe the universe had just been here forever. And that was sort of the belief held by non-believers in God. Those who believed in God believed that God had created the universe pretty much as it is right now. But it did have a beginning. And that beginning was from nothing. In Islam, we believe also, and Allah specifically told us in the Quran, that He created the physical world from nothing. And this nothing really means nothing. Not just there was empty space waiting there to be filled by planets and stars. There was no space, no time, and no material things.
No space, no time.
No space and no time.
It's very long.
So it wasn't just empty waiting for matter to be put in it, and time wasn't just going along waiting for creation. There was no space, no time, and no matter. We can say it, but we can't conceive it, you see. No space is not conceivable. No time is not conceivable. No matter, I guess, is sort of conceivable.
No time, no space.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think to think about no space and no time? There's no thought you can have that represents that. So anyway, this is essentially, as far as I know, Islam is the only religion that says that the universe was created by Allah from nothingness, meaning no space, no time, and no matter. Now, nobody, probably other than Muslims, believed that. It seemed very unlikely, really. I mean, particularly when you get some idea about how big the universe is, you know, the 10,000 billion stars in just the little bubble we can see. So, how does all this come to be? Early philosophers argued that and this was the best argument ever, and this argument still has never been, it's a philosophical argument that has never been beaten as to proof of the existence of God. That if you're out somewhere like in a forest and you find a wristwatch lying there, and you pick up that watch, are you going to think it is possible that watch just happened to come together and be like that? Or are you going to think somebody made that watch? Of course you're going to think somebody made it, right? It would be totally irrational and illogical to think that all the complexities of a watch just happen to come together. You look at the universe, which is, you know, so many trillions of times huger and so many trillions of times more complex. And then you say, well, since a universe of this size and complexity exists, therefore there must have been a universe maker. It couldn't just come to be on its own. So it's called the watchmaker argument for the existence of God. It's a philosophical argument. And no one has ever been able to really defeat that argument. That doesn't mean it convinces non-believers, but nobody can actually, from a logical, from a philosophical point of view, cannot defeat that argument. And you know, as time goes on, we find out more and more things that have to be, like if the electric charge of, say, a proton or an electron were different by like a fraction of 1%, the universe could not come to be. In our solar system, you know, we have this giant planet Jupiter out there. If that planet Jupiter was not there, there are lots and lots of bits of stuff flying around in our solar system, like big asteroids and things. And if lots of them were hitting the Earth, it would have either destroyed the Earth, or the Earth would have never had an environment where life could be developed, where Allah could develop life on it. But what the planet Jupiter does is it sucks in 90-some% of all of these bits of matter and asteroids and meteors and that floating around in the solar system. Almost all of them go to Jupiter because of its huge gravity. See? So I mean, the more you look at it, you see that things are just set up in this very perfect way. Then there is also, so that was a philosophical argument. Then there is a logical argument where you say, okay, if the universe began as nothing, no time, no space, and no matter, and ends up being more than 10,000 billion stars, huge size, 30 billion light years across that we can see, and everything working perfectly. What kind of being, or what could have created that? And logically, there is no known possibility for anything to create that other than a being that we would describe as God. I mean, try and imagine some other way for it to come to be. You can't think of anything, right, outside our conceptual system. So once again, that is powerful, but it does not really convince people. But then finally we get to the science. When I was young, people didn't know the story of the creation of the universe as we know it now. And the universe was believed, as I said, even when I was young, it was still believed to have either been this way forever or created by God the way it is now. But somewhere around I think, late 1960s or early 1970s, somebody came up with the idea that got the name put on it, the Big Bang. Everyone's heard of the Big Bang, probably, right? And what they said with the Big Bang originally, but only for a year or so did scientists hold on to the idea of the Big Bang, although we still use the term today. The original idea of the Big Bang was that a long time ago, all of the matter of the universe was in one place. And because that much matter in one place was so hot and so dense, it couldn't exist like that, and it exploded outwards and became the universe that we see today. That's why they called it Big Bang, like big explosion. Now, within 2 years, and actually, I remember when I first saw that, and I said, cannot be, absolutely impossible. All of that much stuff cannot be together, because if it was all together, it would disappear outside of space and time in what we call a black hole, and would cease to exist. So therefore, it was a false theory. And within 1 or 2 years, scientists realized that the universe did actually begin from nothingness, no space, no time, and no matter. And what they said was, a singularity appeared. A singularity is a point with no dimension. It's a mathematical term. Singularity means a point that has no size at all. And at that point, light came to be. Now, I'm going to keep using the word light. Technically, we're talking about photons of electromagnetic radiation, which is all the forms of energy. But light is within that range, and light is the part of that energy range we're most familiar with. And its characteristics are exactly the same as the rest. It is only the frequency that is different. It's on a continuum. So I'll call it either light or light energy at different times. So at that singularity, light came to be. And that light comes in little bundles of energy called photons. So you have two photons, two little bits of light. I'm not saying at the beginning of the universe. At the beginning of the universe, there was lots and lots. It started as a singularity, a point with no dimension. Within a fraction of a second, it was like millions of miles wide. I mean, it grew that fast. But we'll just talk about two of this almost infinite number of photons. When two photons bump into each other and they have sufficient energy, what they do, two bits of light hit each other, and from that come various particles of matter. Now, we won't talk about all of them. There are actually, we know as subatomic particles, we're all familiar with protons, neutrons, and electrons. There's probably somewhere near 100 different particles. But the main ones of important to us, and most of them, are not most, but the biggest mass of them is protons, neutrons, and electrons. So when two bits of light bump with lots of energy, bump into each other, that collision produces either a proton or a neutron or an electron, and we'll ignore the other particles that come to exist at the same time. So our bodies and everything else are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons and neutrons are very long-lasting. Electrons are not quite so long-lasting. Virtually every proton and neutron that makes up our bodies was created 15 or more billion years ago in that moment of creation when at the singularity light came to be. Now, this light that we are talking about, Allah has told us that He is light. Allah said that He is the light of the heavens and the earth. Also, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he was taken on the journey to paradise, and when he saw Allah, said he saw Allah as light. So we have quite a bit of reading. Now, this isn't to say, please don't go away thinking I'm saying Allah is light. But early scholars did say Allah was uncreated light. What that means is, we don't know. I mean, we don't even know what really light is, right? Because light is energy. For anyone who's taken physics, has anyone been told in a physics class what energy is? No, you get told what energy does, right? But you don't get told what energy is. No one has any idea what energy is.
Energy is as a greater condition.
But it doesn't say anything about what it is, right? So we know all sorts of things about how energy works and how it changes and all the things that it does. But we don't know what it is. So anyway, the early scholars said Allah is uncreated light. Allah Himself has said He is light, and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he saw Allah, said he saw Him as light. Now, none of this is to say for sure that Allah is light. But I think we could say there is some very close connection between Allah and light. Now, Allah, if He was uncreated light, or whether He wasn't, whatever Allah Allah is, which is unknowable to us, Allah says He created light. And He created the light of the heavens and the earth. And this light that appeared at the beginning of the universe at the singularity, I would say, is virtually certainly the created light of Allah. Is created light. I mean, there is no other light. I mean, the light that exists, which is not physical. I'm not going to say today. That's in another talk, I think, why light is not physical. But the light that began the universe is Allah's created light. So Allah took His created light and made it come to be at a singularity. And at that singularity, produced protons, neutrons, and electrons, produced bits of matter from His created light. Now, those protons, neutrons, and electrons, they are actually energy. See, we get the idea that subatomic particles and atoms, they are little bits of stuff. There is no stuff there, right? Protons, neutrons, and electrons are energy fields in motion. So there is no such thing as a bit of stuff. We call it matter, but matter is actually energy in motion that is traveling less than the speed of light. So matter is actually light slowed down. When light is traveling, when light is in its absolute state, the way Allah created it in its absolute state, it occupies, it has no dimension, it has no size, it has no mass, and no size, no mass, and it's not involved in the flow of time. When Allah slows light down, it gains certain characteristics, or it shows certain characteristics. It shows the characteristics of occupying a volume of space or having size. It has 3 dimensions. It goes from no dimensions to 3 dimensions. It comes into a realm of time, so time passes for it. And also it has mass. So that light, when you slow light down, light looks like material particles. And we call those particles of slow light protons, neutrons, and electrons. We call most of them protons, neutrons, and electrons. So technically, not only are angels light, but we are light. But angels are light in its absolute sense. We are light in its relative sense. When you slow light down, light becomes the matter becomes the matter of the universe. Space and time are what are called artifacts of matter. Matter to exist must be in motion. Remember I said what we call a subatomic particle is an energy field in motion. If that energy field were to stop, it would disappear out of space and time. It would no longer be a bit of matter. How many of you have heard of the concept absolute zero in temperature? Not many people have heard of absolute zero? It's the coldest possible temperature. It's like the speed of light is the fastest anything can go through space. Absolute zero is the coldest anything can be. But in the physical world, you cannot get to absolute zero. They have got within millions of a degree of absolute zero, but you cannot get to absolute zero. Because if you could get to absolute zero, the motion of energy of these particles would stop, and they would disappear out of space and time, so that's why you can't get there. Now, I know this is, as a beginning, a little complicated, right? But I just want to give you some idea about the kinds of things we know about this. The important thing to remember is Allah started the universe with light from absolute nothingness. There was no time, no space, and no matter. When there was no space, no time, and no matter, Allah caused a singularity to be, and at that singularity, which is a point with no dimension at all, He allowed His created light to collide with bits of His created light to collide with each other, producing the material particles. Now you remember I said the protons and neutrons of our bodies were created, say, 15 billion years ago, right? They're the same ones. So the same particles that make up our bodies, Allah created 15 billion years ago. But you remember I said in the whole universe that we can see, there are 10,000 billion stars? All of the protons and neutrons of those also were created 15 billion years ago. So can you imagine how much matter Allah created with His created light at the beginning of the universe? And there was no explosion, you see. It expanded outward from that point with no dimension. And it expanded out at a huge speed. It expanded out in the beginning probably thousands of times the speed of light. And you say, how can it go faster than the speed of light? What the speed of light means is nothing can travel through space faster than the speed of light. Space itself has no limit on how fast it can expand. So space can expand many times faster than the speed of light, because it is not going through space, it is existence expanding. So Allah expanded the existence from that singularity in the beginning, probably thousands of times at the speed of light early on. So it could get very big quickly, because He was going to create enough particles for the universe as huge as it is. And that's a lot of particles. I mean, even that, just as we start, right? I mean, I feel already this is very amazing. But this is really substantial. Oh, by the way, all of the science I'm going to tell you is generally accepted science that you won't find a major scientist or physicist in the world who would disagree with these things I'm saying. All of these things are just what we would call the known facts of science. Now, after Allah creates these protons, neutrons, and electrons and expands the universe greatly, the universe then is just some great big space filled with protons, neutrons, and electrons. But protons, neutrons, and electrons just alone aren't very useful. So, say for instance we just have a proton here, and somewhere else we have an electron. Just alone floating out there in the universe, they are not doing anything. But you remember this part's very important, and we said earlier that when Allah makes His creation, He has a purpose for His creation. And He wants it to end up at a certain point. Actually, He wants it to end up with a nice environment for His Khalifah to exist in. Well, this isn't very close. So what Allah does after He creates these material particles, He wants them to get together so that they can become something more complex. So He would like, in the beginning, among other things, He would like a proton, so the plus charge, to have an electron on it, around it, with a equal negative charge. And what do we call this? What is it? Yeah, it's an atom. Which one? What is it? One proton and one electron. Yeah, it's hydrogen. So, how does Allah go from just 3 electrons and protons floating around to hydrogen? What he does is he sends a message, sends messengers from outside of space and time. Now, this is a true fact of physics. Every bit of matter does what it is told to do, and matter is told what it is to do by photons of energy, or light energy, coming into them, carrying information. So, light carries information. So Allah sends messengers of light from outside of space and time, because light is outside of space and time, sends it into the physical universe of space and time. And he sends messages of light to the proton and messengers of light to the electron, saying, get together. And they form that. So the reason that these free protons and electrons floating around in space get together to form hydrogen is because Allah sends messages of light to them to tell them to get together. Now when we see this happening in science, we put a name on it, and we call it one of the 4 basic laws of physics. We call it the electromagnetic force. So we say these are attracted by the electromagnetic force to get together into this form. But the electromagnetic force is just a name we put on our observation of Allah acting upon the protons and the electrons. Now, you might notice that what I'm saying is Allah sends messengers of light to tell them what to do. Now, what are angels?
Light.
They are light, right? And how does Allah tell how are we told Allah tells the things in the material universe what to do? What to do? He sends messengers of light, right? He sends angels to tell the material world what to do. Now, I don't want to say for sure, but it appears, because angels can have all sorts of different forms, it appears that what we refer to as photons of electromagnetic energy or light follow the definition of what we are told angels are. They are messengers of light sent by Allah from outside of space and time into the physical world to tell the matter of the physical world what to do. And so this is really nice that you know, when we find out exactly what is happening, it is exactly what we were told. But until you know it as science, you don't know what was going on. So unfortunately, we get an idea angels are these beings with the wings, and like the Christian idea, you know, it's hard to keep that out of your mind even if you're not Christian. And you think that Allah sends these angels with the wings in to tell matter or tell the physical universe what to do. But that's not apparently how it is. But it is exactly what he said. He sends messengers of light from the spiritual world to the physical world to tell the matter to carry out his will. Now, in the beginning of the universe, Allah created mainly, and perhaps only, 2 kinds of atoms this way that I just told you. He created hydrogen atoms and he created helium atoms. But just as protons, neutrons, and electrons just floating around in space were not very useful for the final fulfillment of Allah's creation, and he needed to go further after he creates hydrogen and helium. He still needs to go further. So what Allah does is, using another mechanism, Allah has, so now in space there are lots of free protons, neutrons, and electrons, and about 2/3 of all of the matter has formed into hydrogen, and 1/3 has formed into helium. And then Allah wants the hydrogen and the helium to get together. So he gets the hydrogen and helium to come together in giant clumps. And we call these the first generation stars. And the first stars were made up of just hydrogen and helium. Our star is made up of all the elements that are on the Earth, 93 or 4 different elements. But Allah created the first stars just with hydrogen and helium. But these stars, they were really giant stars. They would be somewhere maybe 200 to 1,000 times as big as our sun. But because they were so huge, they couldn't exist like that, and they didn't live very long. Compared to our sun, they had a lifetime of just a fraction of a percent. So these giant stars that Allah pulled together, and the way, by the way, once again, when scientists see how Allah pulled all the hydrogen and helium together, and does that in a really orderly manner, scientists put a name on that, another of the basic forces of physics, and they said they come together by gravity. But, you know, these are not actual, these are things like gravity and electromagnetic force. They are actually ideas. You know, they are not, it is not a thing there. It is us seeing Allah act in an orderly manner. And how Allah acts, because scientists didn't know it was Allah doing it, they put a name on it and called it a force. But had no idea why it does it. So Allah gets these giant stars of hydrogen and helium, and here's where this gold comes from I was telling you about. They collapse on each other. And if you push, let's see, what is oxygen? Number 8, is it element number 8?
8.
Okay. So if when this was collapsing, if 4 heliums were pushed together, see, an oxygen atom has 8 protons and 8 electrons. So 8 hydrogen atoms have 8 protons and 8 electrons. But if you stuff them together, those 8 hydrogens no longer stay 8 separate hydrogens, but they combine and become 1 oxygen. And all of the other elements, 100 or more originally, but only 93 that exist still on Earth. Some of them didn't live very long. Were made that way. So the oxygen and the carbon and the iron and the copper and the gold and the silver and the sulfur and everything, all the other elements that exist, they were created in these first generation stars that Allah made from the original hydrogen and helium atoms He created. And when they collapsed through a process that's called nuclear fusion, all of those other elements were formed. Then when they collapsed, they exploded and shot this material out through the universe. So now we have a universe that is full of free electrons, neutrons, and protons, still a lot of hydrogen and helium, but all of the other 90-some atoms that exist. They are floating around in space. So with this universe full of protons, neutrons, electrons, hydrogen, helium, and all the other 94 elements, Allah then wants to bring them together again, because just them floating around is not His plan. And so now through what we call gravity, but He tells them, by the way, all of this that happens, everything that happens, the hydrogen and helium, they get together in the big first generation stars for the same reason the electron and the proton get together. Allah sends messages through photons of electromagnetic energy or light to the helium and hydrogen atoms, telling them to come together into the first generation stars. That's what we call gravity. Allah tells 8 hydrogens to come together to be an oxygen. And he sends messages by light to each of these to tell them what to do. At every stage that happens, messages of light, light energy, tell the matter what to do, and it does it. So now when we have the protons, neutrons, electrons, hydrogen, helium, and all the other 90-some elements just out there floating around, Allah sends messages to all of them by messengers of light and tells them to come together again. So now they come together in suns like our sun, which is a second generation or later star. And those stars will have the 93 or 94 different elements that still exist in them. And the stars form in with a center core with a sort of radiating out from that center core, a circular plane around it that forms into the planets. So that's how Allah makes the stars and the planets. And at that point, the stars and the planets are mainly mainly hydrogen, helium, and all of the other atoms. So is all that sort of clear how Allah gets to the planets and the stars? Okay.
I'm not so sure about the planets.
Sure.
The sun, I can understand how it's formed. How about the planets? Different metals get together.
Yeah. When a whole lot of stuff is out in space and it's coming together, it doesn't actually come together like this. It swirls like when you are letting water go down in the tub. Right? So when things are coming together in a smaller space, they tend to swirl in a direction. And because they are swirling in a direction, that means in a plane around the center, there will be like it'll be like a saucer of stuff, with some of it coming in towards the sun. But as some of it's coming into the sun, clumps of it end up getting together. And those clumps that get together, and they get together for exactly the same reason. Allah sends messengers of light to tell them to join together, but by what we would call gravity, and then they form the different planets. And that's why the planets are more or less on a plane around the sun. And probably throughout the whole universe, all of them are that way.
So the name like gravity, the name is put on the phenomenon.
The phenomena of Allah bringing stuff together when He wants it to get together, we see that happening and we say, oh, that's the force of gravity brings them together. But it is actually Allah doing it, and Allah doing it we call the force of gravity. So now we've got up to the planets. Now, just as the subatomic particles alone weren't enough and Allah put them together to make atoms, Allah puts atoms together. So, everyone know what this is? Right? It is water. So, when there are just hydrogens and heliums floating around in the atmosphere, they are not very useful, but if Allah puts them together, and He puts them together exactly the same way, He would have sent messengers by light. Right? See, I mean, you have to understand, these things don't do anything on their own. They do what they are told to do. And every bit of matter is told what to do by energy coming in and giving it messages on how to act. And the messages tell it exactly what to do. So when there are just free oxygens and hydrogens around, Allah sends messages from light saying 2 hydrogens join together with 1 oxygen in a certain pattern that we call water. And that water performs a very useful function. Now here is a very important thing. that I want you to see is happening. Allah could have just created protons, neutrons, and electrons out of nothing if He wanted to, because Allah can do anything, right? But Allah chose to take His already created light and have bits of His created light collide with each other, producing the protons, neutrons, and electrons. Then, when Allah wanted atoms of hydrogen and helium to exist, independent of the subatomic particles He had already created, if He had wanted to, He could have just created new hydrogen and helium. But He didn't. He took the already existing subatomic particles that He had created from light and put them together to make the atoms. When Allah wanted water to exist, He could have created H2O from nothing. But He didn't. He took the previously existing hydrogen and oxygen atoms and put them together. So what we see Allah doing is building the basic stuff of the universe and then telling it by messages of light to organize into more and more complex groupings to eventually fulfill His plan for creation.
Can you just repeat the last
Sure.
to fulfill His creation? Just so
Yeah.
that we can
So,
take it.
Allah starts with His created light, and from His created light, He creates the basic building blocks of all material existence. Then He takes those building blocks, and first He puts them together into atoms, and then He puts them together into molecules. And at each of those levels, there is an increasing complexity going on, because Allah has a final plan for His physical creation. But He apparently did not, and He could have made the universe just like it is right now if He wanted. I mean, as a matter of fact, if He had really wanted to, He could have made the universe with us sitting here discussing it. You see? But He didn't. He started in a certain way and did it this totally amazing way. And every bit of it, He sends messengers of light from outside of space and time to tell the next stage to happen. And He builds each new stage from the previous stage. So, Allah then, when He, and this stage, the first stage here is subatomic particles. We have light, then subatomic particles, and then atoms, and then molecules. And then in the beginning, when Allah makes molecules, He makes very simple ones. He just puts some simple atoms together and makes simple molecules. But remember, Allah is always making His physical creation progress toward His goal. So although He starts with simple molecules, He goes to more and more complex molecules. So this is one of the simplest, actually the very simplest molecule is called monatomic. And this is like metals. Now, like if you have a gold ring, it's made up of a whole lot of atoms. Those atoms link together in a certain way. They are actually, it becomes a group of it is molecular, and it's held together by what's called a monatomic bond. All of the atoms of one type join together. Then a little more complicated than that is like water, where you have two molecules, and they are called, just can't remember them right now. And anyway, so then he puts various two kinds of atoms together making simple molecules. And then he puts, and remember, each of these, always the step is, even if I don't say so, he sends, like to every atom of gold in your ring, Allah sends a message by light to tell that one atom of gold to link together in a certain way with the other atom of gold. Then he creates the simple molecules like this and goes through a number of stages. And then finally ends up with like two kinds of molecules, then links of molecules. These might be like proteins. Look, I better not put that because I'm just going to go. I'm going to skip a whole lot here. So it goes from the simplest kind of atom to the most complex, molecule to the most complex kind. The DNA molecule. And once he gets to the DNA molecule, this DNA molecule is a way of arranging atoms in such a way that they tell other atoms what to do. And DNA molecule, tells, like developing, whether it's a seed for a tree or ovum for a baby. It tells the baby or the tree how to organize the various atoms in its environment to create a new one of its own type. But it does that by sending messages. The DNA molecule now sends messages to the atoms around it, telling them how to organize to create the new individual.
So are plants made this way also?
Yes, plants are made this way. When I say biological life, I'm actually referring to plants and animals. Because plants and animals, we share a lot of DNA. Like, for example, a human being shares identical DNA with a chimpanzee of about 98.5%. So the message between a human being and a chimpanzee in the DNA molecule is 98%, over 98% the same. With a cow, probably 85%. But amazingly, with a tree, 40%. See, our DNA with an identical part of our DNA with a tree is like 40%. With an amoeba, like 15%. So Allah put these DNA messages together, or told a lot of atoms to get together in a way that we call a DNA molecule. And as that DNA molecule unfold a whole lot of patterns that he wants to be, different animals and plants.